Hello and welcome to Comic Culture. I'm Terrence Dollard, a professor in the Department of Mass Communication at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. My guest today is writer-artist Monica Gallagher. Monica, welcome back to Comic Culture.
Hello! So thrilled to be back. Yay!
So, Monica, the last time we spoke, you were still working a regular job, and then soon after you switched over to becoming a full-time writer, artist, cartoonist. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that transition, because I would imagine it's kind of scary going from, having some sort of steady income to being completely reliant on your creative abilities.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wouldn't have been able to do it without my current job working for Webtoons, which is a weekly webcomic. So it's kind of like a regular paycheck. So I feel like a lot of freelance creators in general have trouble with the regular clients and the regular consistency. It's usually feast or famine. So that really helped me. It helped give me the confidence to actually quit my job. But I think, and I've been working part-time freelance for years, and I always heard that as soon as you do it, you'll regret not having doing it sooner. You just have to jump in and be terrified all the time.
So Webtoon, this is where you've got two comics there. You have Assassin Roommate, which is one of my favorites, and Boo, It's Sex. So I was wondering if you could kind of tell me a little bit how you got their attention and how you ended up doing not one but two regular books, or not books, I guess strips.
Yeah, books eventually, hopefully. I met my former editor at Webtoons. I met him at comic conventions like a couple of years in a row. And the first time he introduced himself, I was like, no one's going to pay for webcomics. Like, that's not a thing. And then the more I saw him and the more people they got, then I was like, oh, this is actually legit. This might be something that I can actually do. So it helped, too, that a lot of my comics friends that I knew from like the indie comic scene had started working for them, too. So then I knew, because a lot of people will approach you at shows and they don't know what they're talking about, or, it's not legit. So it took a while of meeting people and networking to figure out they were cool. And then as soon as they originally wanted me for another project that fell apart, and so I said, oh, I'd be happy to pitch anytime. They're like, okay, pitch right now. And then I'm used to the world where you pitch and then you hear back in like a year and a half, and as soon as I pitch it, they're like, okay, can you start it next month? So that's how Assassin Roommate started. And then Boo, they wanted a sex ed, like a comedic sex ed comic, and I knew Danielle Corsetto would be perfect for it. She's a good friend of mine, and she's been crushing it in webcomics for a long time with her comic Girls with Slingshots, which had a lot of sex ed in it. So, and it was an opportunity to work with Danielle, so I knew that would be perfect. So I jumped on that, even though doing two comics each week I wouldn't recommend.
Yeah, I imagine it's a lot of things to kind of keep up in the air and make sure you don't drop one or the other. But before we get into, I guess, the fun, creative part of being a cartoonist, I wanted to talk about the tough business side, because when we met last time at HeroesCon, you were doing a number of different panels. You were also doing some stuff for Webtoons. They had a big booth set up at the show. So I'm wondering how much marketing and how much sort of press you have to do. I know you also have a great podcast that you worked with called Lethal Lit. So how much of that sort of promotion and self-marketing do you have to do, and how do you do that?
I think any creator, if you ask them, they'll always feel like, oh, I could do more, because you want to make sure people know you exist, and it's really difficult sometimes with creative projects because you have to disappear and work on it, or you can't share what you're working on. So it is a weird balance of telling people hey, I'm alive, don't forget about me when my project comes out in 2 years. So you it's nice that comics has such a close community, and we all kind of get ideas from each other on how to promote stuff. And then we also do promote each other, because none of us are actually in competition with each other. We're all trying to boost each other up so that comics in general are a feasible income. So it is kind of a juggling act and figuring out what's important and what you need to talk about without being annoying. I don't think anyone ever feels totally comfortable with what they're doing and that they're doing it right. That's definitely a learning process for me.
It's funny because I think a lot of folks in the arts, we tend to be a little bit more introverted, and having to promote ourselves, whether it's to try, in my case, get a client to do a commercial or a short film or something, or in your case, trying to get people to invest in your art, it's kind of tough to do that. So is there any sort of formula that you follow, like steps that you take so that way you know that you can effectively give your message to folks?
Yeah, I think it helps to think of your work as separate from yourself. Even if your work is super personal, no matter what, it's separate from you. And I think that helps because then you don't feel like you're putting yourself out there as much. It's more of a business and a product. Because it's always easy to promote someone else's stuff. It's really hard to talk about your own stuff because then you have to get kind of an attitude about it that where you think it's amazing. You're telling people it's amazing. And you never feel like it's amazing when it's your stuff. So that is one of the tricks I've used, is trying to think of it as outside of me. It's never like truly my like deep personal thoughts that I have to worry about being rejected. I don't know if that's very helpful, but
No, I think it is, because we work on something and you put your head down and you do the job and you lose that sense of perspective, and sometimes you don't know if it's any good, because I think we all kind of sit there and say, even if we're doing Citizen Kane or the Mona Lisa, we're going to be like, maybe if I did this, the smile's not right. So it's kind of tough to get that confidence. So when you deal with other creators, how do you know when somebody's just blowing sunshine up your skirt and somebody's actually giving you some good feedback that you can use?
I think it helps. Well, you can usually tell good feedback from kind of flattering but useless feedback, depending on how specific it is or what people are interested in. So my favorite kind of feedback from other creators is about like tiny details like layout or panel composition or dialogue, things like that, because then they're really paying attention and they have actually ingested what you're doing. Whereas a lot of people, it may not be something they're as obsessed with as other comics people are. They just overall really like it and they don't know why. Like that's a very common thing for any of us in any medium. Like I can look at art in any other medium and not be able to talk about it as articulately as the stuff that I'm actually interested in, or notice things that other people are specifically putting in. So I think, specifics help a lot. Because it's never useful to just be like, this is great or this is crap. It doesn't really help.
Now, one of the things I'm going to say is Assassin Roommate is great. And the reason why is because you've got a variety of really great, well thought out characters, and your artwork is, from where we talked, I guess, about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years at this point, you were working on Bonnie and Clyde 9 to 5. And what I've noticed is your art has just taken on more life than even what it had back then. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about when you're creating a book like what we hope will be a book, Assassin Roommate, and how you kind of planned it and how you see it evolve as you keep working on it season after season.
Yeah, well, that's always a nightmare for artists, that especially when you're working on a book that's one finished project, that the beginning and the end, your fear is that all the characters look totally different, because your art is always going to improve. And so you want it to be consistent enough that it's not shocking, like early Garfield, if you ever saw that, versus like later Garfield. It's totally different, or The Simpsons. So that evolution is natural, and I think it's like going back and seeing what you've done before helps, so that you can kind of like not veer too far off course. But you always hope that like you're continuing to refine it and make it consistent, but also better and better. I think the hardest thing is going from each book or each season to the next and making sure it's consistent with her, and not just like a whole new cast of characters just because I draw them differently now, because I haven't drawn them in a month.
And when you're doing Assassin Roommate, it comes out weekly. So are you sort of working just a week ahead and doing however many pages and then uploading it? Or is it something where you're 3-4 months ahead and we're just seeing it on a great schedule?
Well, it's funny because I think the first 2 seasons, so I'm about to start the 4th season. The first 2 seasons I definitely had work done ahead of time because they required me to when I had time. The 3rd season was week to week, and I've never done that before. That was pretty punishing, but it also helped me get a lot faster, and it helped show me that I can do that. And then it was really interesting to see my creative process change. A lot of stuff that I would have agonized over creatively, I just had to do it. And it really got me over a lot of fears that I had. Like, I don't want to put them in this background setting because I don't want to draw it. I was like, well, you have to do it right now. So, yeah, we'll see how this season, I'd like to get a little ahead of time this season because it's really rough to do that many pages per week. And I do a lot of traveling, so it's like I've gotten very used to carrying my scanner with me wherever I go now, and working in coffee shops and hotel rooms. But yeah,
It must be fun going through, airport security with a scanner.
yeah.
So you talked about working quickly, and this is something Matt Fraction once said was working under a deadline helps him not be precious and just put the work out there and have it be what it is at that moment. So have you found that you've actually been a lot happier with these, the tight deadline where you're just kind of pushing yourself and saying, well, it's got to be done, or are you kind of saying, well, nuts, I should have given myself another week?
Yeah, I mean, I always beat myself up about the quality. I think it could always be better, especially if I'm feeling rushed. Like, my biggest fear is always that people will be able to tell it when I'm rushed, that it'll show in the work. But I wouldn't be able to do anything without deadlines. Deadlines are always very important to me because a lot of people do get hung up, and a lot of people who want to do comics never put one out there because they're always waiting for it to be perfect, and you have to just put it out there and then do the next one. You can't just hold off until it's perfect because it never will be, and you'll never put anything out. So you're always going to find flaws later and be like, oh, but that's part of the process.
So one of the things that Webtoon does is you can either look at it on their website or you can download their app, which I have on my phone. And it's something where you're kind of scrolling up to read the next page. So when you're laying out, or the next panel I should say, when you're laying out your page, are you just doing like one panel at a time, or are you doing sort of that traditional newspaper style, or are you doing the traditional comic book style and then just scanning and putting the art up that way?
It's interesting because it took me a while to get used to it. I thought originally I could just do a normal comic page and then split it up. And you can't because it has to be, you have restrictions for width, but not height. So I do still draw on 11 by 17 paper, but I have to split it up in a way so that it reflects the screen size of the phone so that I don't like make it too wide. And then when they scale it down, it's like really tiny. So yeah, it doesn't resemble a typical comic page anymore, which is going to be interesting formatting it for a book to see how that reads. But I love that it's such a different experience reading it that way, because then you can play with, time while you scroll. It's kind of like what Scott McCloud originally envisioned for webcomics back in the early 2000s, that it would be like this infinite scrolling and that you play with like gutter and panel size that way, just by like how long it took you to like scroll down to the bottom of a page. It's kind of fascinating.
What is fascinating is you are so good at that, because I've been reading through it and there'll be some really tense moment and then there's just this big gap between
Yeah.
Is Mags going to get, shot or something? And then you go through it and it's like, oh, come on. Oh, and then, yeah. And it's just such a great tease. And I'm wondering, when did that sort of click for you when you realized that you could give that dramatic pause visually and still, tell a great story and keep the audience at the edge of their screens, I guess?
Well, I'm glad I'm successful because you never know. You never know if it's being read the way you intend it to. But yeah, I think my editor helped me a lot initially with that. Like, remember to leave space. Like, if they're in a new location, maybe make them like go down further. But all of the webcomics, I find it fascinating. All the webcomics on Webtoon do it differently. Like, they all treat it differently, which I think is like really cool. Like, some of them have like one big panel that goes on and on and on. It's just continuous art, which I've never done anything like that. And so I would like to play around with it more, but then I also don't want to ruin the style that I've developed. Like, that's that consistency thing again. I want to make sure it's like Assassin Roommate always looks like Assassin Roommate.
And you're doing a traditional art on board where you're taking ink and you're dipping the brush in and you're creating the artwork, scanning it. And some people, I guess, are working digitally. So I'm wondering, as you're doing this, the old school method with this new delivery, is there a temptation on your part to just, I'm going to try it digitally, because then you could do that long panel and you could put in all the detail because you can just blow it up as you're working. But I would imagine if you're doing a board, there's only so big a scanner could be to do a panel, that will take me 5 minutes to read through.
Yeah. Or at least you can like just stitch it together, I guess, but that would kind of be a nightmare too. Yeah, I think eventually I should start learning how to draw digitally. I just love the feel of ink and brush so much that, and I do find it distracting that you can kind of like, click undo forever when you're drawing digitally. I think that would be very, very hard to be like, no, I don't like that line. No, don't like that line. but a lot of people have moved into it, and I do like the flexibility. I think in an ideal world, I'd like to be able to draw either way, and you couldn't be able to tell, but it takes so much practice, I imagine.
Another thing that takes practice is writing dialogue. And what you've been able to do with Assassin Roommates is create characters that have unique voices. So I'm wondering, when I read Mags, when I read Kurt, when I read Jason, when I read Jamie, I'm reading all of these characters and they have different personalities. So as a writer, I mean, obviously that's what you do, but how do you do what you do?
I think it helps to base them on people you know. That's definitely helpful. And then it was a long time before I realized they had to have different voices. That took me, I'm a slow learner. Yeah, because you should be able to tell who's talking without seeing them. And they're all going to sound like me. Obviously, they're going to sound like different facets of me, but it helps to kind of like give yourself a cheat sheet. And I used to do this with Bonnie too, like just write down like a few characteristics of each character, so that every time you write them, you look at them and you're like, oh, right, they would never say that. Like, that's doom and gloom, and Bonnie is sunshine and light, so she would never have that perspective. Or sometimes with slang, I think everybody has the same slang, which if they're friends, that makes sense, but that should be mixed up a little too. I need to get better about that. But it is fun because you do feel like you're talking to a bunch of imaginary characters, and you're like hanging out with them and seeing how they would react to a situation rather than you're saying it yourself.
Another thing that I think is a lot of fun is that you will use, a lot of artists will have, somebody gets punched and there'll be a thwack or something like that. You'll actually have something that says punch, or a kick that will just say kick. So it's fun, it's playful, it goes well with the characters and the situations that you're putting together. But is this something that you consciously did, or is this something where you just said, I don't know what to write there, let me just write kick?
I think initially I started, I did it by accident because I didn't know what to write. And I think like some of my favorite ones are like something like this and saying like gesture, like the sound effects, gesture. But then people have made fun of me, so now I do it on purpose. Now I try to see like how much I can do it without it being too obnoxious, but it's fun.
I think my favorite was blink, blink.
Blink, blink.
But yeah, it's true. I mean, if you're trying to indicate that, maybe in a screenplay you could write, oh, she bats her eyes a certain way, but in a sequential art, it's really kind of tough. And sometimes, going direct, if you have that right attitude, you can certainly do that and make the audience buy into it.
Yeah, and we had trouble, not to switch topics drastically, but we had a lot of trouble with that with the podcast when we were writing it. Sound effects. Like they said we couldn't just say, sound of two people hugging. We had to like come up with a sound effect. I'm like, I don't know what that sounds like. Like, does it sound like, like what does that sound like? I don't know how to describe that.
So let's talk a little bit about Lethal Lit right now, because it is a departure. You're known as a sequential artist and writer, but you're also a writer. So this is something, maybe you could tell us a little bit about what Lethal Lit's, I guess the bullet point would be on what the story is, and how you go about writing it.
Yeah, so it's a collaboration between Alex Segura and I, and Alex is a really amazing writer, and he's been working with Archie Comics for a long time, but he also does his own crime and noir fiction writing. So he was already working on the project, and they brought me on to work with him. And luckily, like, our partnership is really fun because he is much more of like the structure, and he knows like crime drama, and he knows like noir elements and everything. And I'm much more of like the teen dialogue and like how to like bring together different characters, intertwine all their stories and their personalities. So we work really well off of each other on that. But Lethal Lit is meant to be a kind of a murder mystery with teens, and it specifically focuses on Tig Torres and her quest to kind of figure out like who the big bad is in her hometown where she grew up, who's a serial killer. So it's a mixture of like Buffy stuff, but also like real, actual, scary true crime that teens are having to deal with. So it's kind of been really fascinating because I'm a big podcast listener, and I've written scripts for screenplays and everything, but I've never had to write it's basically like a radio drama, which is really fun.
And what's got to be difficult is in a visual medium like film or comics, you are writing dialogue that doesn't necessarily tell the audience what's happening because we can see it. So as you're writing dialogue for this podcast, How is that, for you making that switch to saying, well, I'm going to go pick up the phone right now and call for pizza?
Exactly. We had a lot of those moments where it's like, you know what, I'm going to tell you exactly what I'm doing right now, because otherwise we weren't sure how to show it. Yeah, I think it helps if you put in stuff like that and then you can walk it back. It's harder to go the opposite way where you're trying to be too subtle, because we started out that way and people were like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know who's in this room. I don't know who left. So we had to, like, if someone comes in, they kind of announce themselves, or they're like, oh, it's so and so. That's a fun challenge, because I'm always tempted to make it really cheesy and awful that way. But yeah, it helps to put all that in and then walk it back.
And I do recall towards the end of the year, wasn't Lethal Lit put on a list of the top podcasts of 2018, or am I mistaken?
It was mentioned by the New York Times, and we freaked out. But it was funny because it didn't say and this is me being self-deprecating, I should just own it, but it didn't say the top podcast. It was just like a list of podcasts. I was like, that's good enough for me. That's great.
Well, anytime that something that you do is in the New York Times and doesn't feature, followed by an arrest and prison sentence, you should be good.
Yeah, and I'm going to put that on my business card from now on. NewYorkTimes.com mentioned artist, Monica Gallagher.
So is this a story that you're going to be able to continue, or is this one of those self-contained stories that you've already now told the whole tale, and that maybe we're going to have to look for a new storyline in the future?
Well, yeah, I won't say either way. I won't ruin the surprise. It's bigger. Let's just say it's bigger than what's already come out.
But
I won't go to if it's character driven, or if it's setting driven, or theme driven. I won't ruin that, but yeah.
Well, I guess this would tie back to Assassin Roommate, because one of the things that I noticed was that Mags goes to the same pizza place as Bonnie does in Bonnie and Clyde. So this seems that you've got a whole, monoverse out there.
Well, that's awesome. I'm going to steal that.
So is this something where you just kind of have those funny little places? What's the name of the bar that they go to?
Headshots.
Headshots. So is this something where you're thinking of these great names and you just think, well, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and use Pizza Party again because it's such a good name?
It's really fun and easy for me to come up with fake business names. I think I was just looking at, I came up with a donut shop called Day of the Donut, and all the donuts look like they're like being eaten alive, which I thought was pretty funny. But yeah, I did do that on purpose because I wanted people to wonder if Bonnie would like make an appearance, or if, that was the same universe.
I'm looking forward to the crossover, is what I'm saying.
How will it happen? Will someone put a hit out on Mags and Bonnie has to save her? Yeah, I don't know.
And plus, we could maybe get some more werewolves in.
That's right.
Now, one of the other things that I've noticed is that there seems to be a lot of layers in Assassin Roommates, where you have this whole family element that's happening with Mags, both the physical family and the family that she creates. But then even her rivals are a family, and you have the twins who are, her rival, or her nemesis, I guess. Nemesises. So I'm wondering, is this something that you're consciously working out like ahead of time, or is this just as it's happening, hey, this would be a cool element to add in?
For me, it's always a combination of both. Like, I plan some things, and other things are total happy accidents. And it's funny because I can tell sometimes I write stuff with a gap in mind, specifically like, oh, at some point this is going to come back and it's going to be great. And then later on, I'm like, oh, now I have to figure out that thing that I left like a bit for, that I have to fill in later. It's interesting because I think if you develop the characters well enough, they'll talk to each other for you, and that makes it easier on you. And then if you set up certain things in the story, a lot of that like just comes at you like as you're writing it. At least it does for me. But I know there are people out there who methodically plan everything. My brain doesn't work that way, unfortunately.
Now, one of the cool things is about Assassin Roommates, and I know I'm talking a lot about it, but you're putting it out in what you call seasons, and I think that's interesting because if it's chapter, that seems more book. But I think we're all used to binging something on Netflix or Prime or something like that, where we will watch a whole season of a story. So was this something that you came up with, the concept of seasons, or was it something that Webtoons was coming up with?
No, it's something that my old editor coined the term, because the chapters come out each week and each chapter is 5 pages. So I think that was a way to break it up. I guess they could call it like sections, but they didn't want to call it book since it was Webtoon. Yeah. So, but I do like thinking of it as a show because it runs for 6 months, and I love that people can't binge it. Like they have to read it week to week. It drives like most of my audience, I think, is younger, and it drives them crazy that they can't. And they read so fast too. When they read past seasons, they're like, they read 6 months of my work in an hour. And I'm like, oh. So I like that it forces them to have to read it each week and really savor it.
And what's really great is that you are reaching millions of people because you can see the statistics there. How many people are actually reading your strip either weekly or the whole season? And in an era of print seeing declining numbers, it is interesting to see that audiences will go to a website to look up comics and find new content every week.
Yeah, and I think it's really bridged a lot of gaps of people who still don't feel comfortable going into comic shops. Like they don't know comic shops have gotten incredible, like they've gotten so much better in general and more welcoming to people. But I think a lot of older readers especially like are more comfortable like looking at their phone to read, especially women who are used to reading and then got really into ebooks. They're big into like reading comics that way, and I don't think they'd ever pick up a comic book. That's like, it's just much more comfortable and easy to do it on their phone. So I think that's fantastic that we're able to get people who wouldn't normally read paper comics reading them on their phone.
Well, Monica, I'm being told that we are out of time. I'd like to thank you so much for taking time out of your day to talk to us today. I'd like to thank you folks at home for watching Comic Culture. We will see you again soon. Comic Culture is a production of the Department of Mass Communication at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke.